Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, April 26, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Pauhana Friday, heading into a long, slow, hopefully relaxing weekend. Although after the last 2 weeks of complete insanity, it's kind of hard to know what to expect. The situations are escalating. The first false flag has just fallen flat on its face. Are they planning a main event? We don't know. We're going to get into that. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room today, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So looking back over the last basically 2 weeks, since the Boston Marathon bombing, it is very obvious at this point that the percentage of people who are trusting the official narrative for the Boston bombing are in the single digits. Certainly the result that we got when we had our own online poll here at whatreallyhappened.com. And, of course, part of the problem is they destroyed their own credibility by changing the story so many times about what was going on. To recap on some of the high points, it's turning out that the younger brother, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, was not armed when he was apprehended in that boat in Watertown. And there's still no explanation for why the police just opened fire on him, hundreds of rounds. Now, of course, it's obvious all the police who were wounded in that free fire melee were the victims of friendly fire. They were shooting each other, and they just kept pouring onto the boat here. And obviously, Dzhokhar did not attempt to shoot himself and commit suicide, resulting in the throat wound. Now questions are being raised whether that throat wound even existed when he climbed out of the boat, whether it's a gunshot wound at all. One report says it's actually a knife cut. Maybe intentional, to keep him from speaking, to keep the lid on this whole thing. It's just amazing how this story has fallen apart. Then, of course, we have the naked man, the older brother, Tamerlan, who was arrested, put in the patrol car, perfectly healthy, albeit naked. And then all of a sudden the next day, he's dead. His younger brother ran over him. What a horrible thing. Then, of course, we get a witness who saw it all come down, that the older brother was run over by a police SUV and then shot. And so it just keeps building up and building up and building up. Now, I have been inundated by a lot of emails pointing to obvious signs of fraud at the scene of the bombing. And I haven't spent a lot of time on them, not because I don't think it's real, but because I wanted to stay focused on what this false flag was being used for. Blame the Muslims, blame the Chechens, blame the Iranians. Somebody even tried to blame global warming. Everybody's out there humping this thing for their own particular agenda. But there are reasons to suspect a major, major flim-flam. And I'm not just talking about the, here it's a white backpack and there it's a backpack. I'm talking about some of those victims on the ground. Now, before I get into this, you need to understand something about these emergency drills. And we now know there was a bomb drill going on at the time. And when they have drills, they always recruit people to play victims. Because if you're having a disaster drill and you don't have somebody to play victims, or you don't have somebody simulating the bomb, there's not much point. Everybody shows up, there's nothing to do, they eat donuts, drink coffee, they go home. Many years ago when I was a student at Cal State Fullerton, they had this large multi-jurisdictional massive earthquake drill. And they came over to our college theater department and said, here's your chance. We're going to pour blood all over you and bandage you up, and the paramedics are going to, take care of you. And it was basically a fun thing to do for that day. So what happens? If you go over to the FEMA's website, they actually have a page of the guidelines for the actors who participate in the drills. So drills, actors, that's normal. Why it's being misused this time. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the fraud of the Boston Marathon media coverage. And to recap what I said before the commercial break, when you have a disaster or terror drill, it is normal practice to have actors playing the victims. So the ambulance crews have somebody to practice and rehearse with. That's normal. If you go over to the FEMA website, they actually have a page of directions for their actors to follow when they're taking part in these drills. And they go out to the local college drama departments and they will recruit people to come in and play victims. And just do a good job, make it as real as possible, and they'll have bandages and they'll have all this other stuff there. And that appears to have been going on as part of this Boston bomb drill. Remember, the Boston Globe has confirmed those tweets that went out over its Twitter channel, saying that there was, in fact, a bomb drill underway. There was going to be a controlled explosion as part of the simulation. One of the two explosions near that marathon finish line may have been, appears to have been set off by the bomb squad as part of the bomb drill. And the other explosion was the one that is supposed to be real and supposedly blamed on, well, whoever they're trying to blame this thing on. Now they're trying to rope the Chechens into it. But there are actors in these drills. And I selected, I don't want to go into all the details of the fraud, but I wanted to point out a couple. I posted one of the well-known photos of the victims of the Boston bombing writhing in pain on the ground in all the blood, and there are a couple of things wrong with it. First of all is the blood itself. It's bright, bright, bright red, and if you will think back to the last time you had to have a blood test or you donated blood, you will realize that real human blood is actually kind of a dark red color. Now, in movies and TV, they brighten it up to make it more horrific. And that's what looks like is on the ground here. And they picked the wrong color blood. And just for those of you for a little Hollywood inside information, the fake blood that is manufactured by companies like Max Factor comes in different formulations, depending upon what film stock you have in the camera and the circumstances of shooting. In fact, for those of you who remember the first Jaws movie, all the blood that was all over the place was a mixture of bright day-glow orange tempera paint and Karo syrup. Because the regular synthetic blood from the makeup companies, when you pour it in the blue ocean, it looks black like ink. So they got the day-glow orange, they mixed it with Karo syrup so it would stick together and not wash away immediately, and that's what they used on the movie Jaws. And back when I was doing physical special onstage effects, and I worked with the makeup people a lot, blood came labeled for, like, this is Technicolor blood, this is panchromatic blood, and it comes in a wide variety of colors. And this blood that is on the ground in this photo is simply too bright and too red to be human blood. And, of course, you don't see any darkening or clotting that you would with real blood that's spilled. These are some of the actors hired to play in the drill. Now, they're talking about the guy who lost his legs. And it turns out he has been identified as a war veteran who had already lost his legs in the war zone, and he was simply made up to look like he'd lost a leg in the bombing. And apparently an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Stanley Monteith, has come out and said the bone that you see sticking out of the stump on this guy's leg, it isn't even a human tibia. It's just a bone they stuck on there. And by the way, just for those of you who pay attention to details, there are two bones in the lower leg of the human being. Get out your Gray's Anatomy and check for yourself. There are two bones in there. So it's a lot of fakery. Now, the scandal isn't that there were actors at this drill, because that is normal procedure when you have a drill. The scandal here is the corporate media took photos of these actors in their makeup and is presenting them to you as the real victims to maximize the impact of this horrible Boston bombing. But there were actors on the ground, and they were in makeup and costume and prosthetics as part of the drill, because that is the standard operating procedure. Okay? Now, Lindsey Graham is already out there saying they're seeking a third man from the Boston bombings. There's still one of these terrorists at large. I wonder if they're setting somebody else to be a patsy in a main event yet to come. Seems to be a lot of attention focusing on New York. New York Police Department and the federal government are going to have a terror drill involving the release of deadly chemicals in the New York subway system. How convenient when they're trying to sell us on the idea that Syria has sarin gas. We're going to grab a phone call here. Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, I hope I'm not off topic. But in 1971, I lived in Daly City. I was going on a motorcycle ride. I was getting ready a news flash came on the TV from CBS or something regarding a speech Nelson Rockefeller was giving to the city and people of New York. In it, he stated in part, and in 30 years when these buildings are brought down because of a terrorist act, because of what they stand for.
Well, everybody knew, you're talking the World Trade Towers, of course.
Yeah, but this was in 1971 in a speech at the completion of the first tower.
Well, I would certainly like to see a transcript or a recording of that speech.
So would I, because I've looked for it forever.
But you need to understand that in the good old days, back when the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building were being built, they were built to last as long as possible. Modern buildings are actually built with a lifespan. We're going to build this building to last for, and 30 years happens to be the current benchmark. We're going to build this building, it'll last 30 years, we'll tear it down, resell the land, build something even bigger. That's the new architectural engineering situation. So I find it plausible that Rockefeller said when these buildings are torn down in 30 years. Whether he linked it to a terror attack, again, I'd like to see a transcript or a recording of him saying that. That one's a bit of a stretch. Okay?
Oh, that's what I remember, and until 2001, I had no idea what I'd heard. And, of course, when the second building was hit, it was pretty obvious that it wasn't an accident.
Okay, well, again, I'd like some confirmation on that speech. Thank you very much.
So would I.
We're going to let you go here and get back to the story. Now, interestingly enough, and again, back on the topic that nobody who's not on a government paycheck is buying this stuff, and a lot of people who are on federal government paychecks aren't buying this stuff about Boston here. But apparently up at the United Nations, there was a UN official. He is the special rapporteur of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Richard Falk, who is basically towing the official line as to what happened in Boston, but basically said, you know, if you're looking for a motivation, it is this endless Israel's attack against their neighbors and unquestioning U.S. support for Israel's policy. And so immediately Ronald Lauder, the president of the World Jewish Congress, condemned him. How dare you say these bombings have anything to do with our foreign policy? You know, these people love it when we come into their country and blow them up and shower white phosphorus on them and napalm and drones and everything. And they kicked up a huge fuss. How dare you portray Israel in a bad light? The good news is, just before we went to airtime, is that Falk is going to keep his job. I guess everybody gets sick and tired of Israel screaming, anti-Semite, wolf, nuclear, they've been going on so long. Can you just shut the heck up? Tired of hearing about it. Tired of all this screeching about things that happened in Germany before we were all born. Kindly join us all here in the 21st century. We have problems here and now today in front of us to deal with. Genocides, dispossession of people, of their lands, ethnic cleansing, it's all happening here and now. I'm tired of all these people who are so hopelessly trapped in the past, in the first half of the previous century. They can't seem to get out of it. Tired of hearing about all this stuff. Now, another politician, and this is a name you should remember, Stella Tremblay. Repeat after me, Stella Tremblay. Write it on the blackboard 100 times before you go home. She is a state representative from New Hampshire. Go Granite State, go live free or die. And she basically came up and said publicly, the Boston Marathon bombings was a plot by the U.S. federal government. She called it a black ops terrorist attack to, push forward this continuation, expansion of the war on terror to justify wars on Syria, Iran, maybe Chechnya. Maybe they're going to go into Chechnya now. So this woman, Stella Tremblay of New Hampshire, is a lady of rare courage. I presume at this point her political career has just evaporated. But there's a lady of courage, and we need to remember who she is. Now, we're seeing earlier in the week as the U.S. government lost control of the narrative of Boston, and they started thrashing around about this whole thing. A week ago today, Obama was up there saying, no, don't look at the pictures and videos yourselves. We'll conduct an investigation, and we, the government, will tell you what you should be believing. And now we've been seeing this last week, all this bashing of the online community, the independent media, the blogs. And so over at Soda Head, they were running a poll is there anything that can be done about Internet-enabled radicalization? And they have, basically the piece was going on, oh, you can find bomb recipes as fast as you can find friends on Facebook or a good deal on eBay. And they're basically, this is the attack on the ability of the people to communicate to each other in a mass format. And we knew this was going to happen. They're trying to somehow tie in the independent media and the Internet with these terror attacks so they can say, we, the government, must control everything that you see and hear on the Internet. It's kind of like the old original Outer Limits, you know, that voice at the beginning over the oscilloscope, we will control everything you see and hear. We'll control the horizontal. We'll control the vertical. We'll control your brain. We're the U.S. government, and that's our job. Got to take a break for commercials? And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about the attempt to demonize the Internet, social media even, and certainly the independent media for Boston. Oh, they're tied in somewhere. They got the bomb directions off this online Al-Qaeda magazine, Insight, which we've already outed earlier this week as just another propaganda fake, because on their 10th edition, they featured Adam Gadon, the American Al-Qaeda, and we know that Adam Gadon is a phony. His real name is Adam Perlman. He's the grandson of one of the founders of the Anti-Defamation League. Even the corporate media, when we blew that story wide open, the corporate media had to come to, yeah, he comes from a Jewish background, but he converted to Islam, and that's why you should fear him. And it's just all fakes and phonies and more of it, and now we know that the government goes to these lengths, and the corporate media helps them to lie us into these wars. So they're out there on this little poll they had on Soda Head saying, is there anything that can be done about Internet-enabled radicalization? And, of course, the Internet is not the cause of radicalization. If you assume this terror attack is real, and we all know what assume means, the cause is government corruption, wars on everybody, Wall Street crime. This is what creates the anger that leads people to strike back. Of course, I'm absolutely convinced at this point Boston was another one of these U.S. government-certified false flag attacks. And so why are they coming after the Internet? Well, nothing new about that. Every tyrant in history tries to prevent the oppressed population from communicating with each other. The French King Louis XVI repeatedly hunted down and smashed Jean-Paul Marat's printing presses as a danger to public order. But the printing press wasn't the problem. Louis was, and eventually he lost his head for his crimes against the people. During the American Revolution, the British also ran around smashing colonial printing presses because those patriot publications made the colonials unhappy with their lives under British rule, and that cannot be allowed to happen. But the important thing to remember is that all of these attempts to cut the people off from each other, to keep them isolated and dependent on the official story, to keep them enslaved, to keep them believing that life was supposed to be toil and surrender, all these efforts to isolate the people and separate them failed and will continue to fail. The Internet and the independent media have changed the fundamental nature of information flow through society. Those institutions that can evolve to adapt to the new reality will survive. Those that can't are doomed to extinction. We're just all going to stand back and let it find the place where it's going to fall down, go boom. Now, of course, in the aftermath of this military crackdown in Boston, and everybody's saying, oh, yes, that was a good thing, and yes, the cops have all these new expensive toys, but they're only going to use them for catching terrorists, right? You are so naive. Basically, the American police have been militarized, armored trucks, tanks, fully automatic weapons, all of this high-technology surveillance. They don't leave it at home when they're not out there catching terrorists. What happened in Boston, stay inside, close your windows, don't look out, don't take pictures and video, while we do what must be done for the national security. That's being sold as the new normal. that all the corporate media has to say is, there's a terrorist suspect in your neighborhood. Citizens, this is a code, new color code, peach, taupe, or mauve. This is a code, peach. Get inside your home, close your windows, don't listen, don't look, don't take pictures. And they go out there and violate some citizens' civil rights. Or they simply shoot up and murder some patsy so he can't stand in front of the news cameras and say, I'm just a patsy, the way Lee Harvey Oswald did. What happened in Boston during this whole situation is the new face of law enforcement in this country. And they want you to think this is a good thing. By the way, speaking of phony bombs thing, we were talking yesterday about how we had a suspicious package incident here in Honolulu when it closed down the circuit court and they evacuated schools and everything. The package turned out to be completely harmless. They went out there and they shot it with a water cannon and it wouldn't explode, and then they did something else and it turned out to be just junk, just garbage. It was phony. Keeping up the terror, keep phoning in bomb threats. Keep the level of fear up so that Americans will just attack who they're told to attack without daring to think here. And as we said earlier in the week, the security industrial complex is already milking Boston for everything they can. The president of the largest unmanned aircraft system organization wasted no time in adding Boston to the pitch. You must have drones to deal with this thing. Well, the Boston bombing was carried out in the middle of an intense police presence with thousands of cameras and a bomb squad. How would drones overhead have prevented the bombing? And the answer is they won't. We're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, CNN has been running this story all day about bomb-sniffing dogs and how great they are and how you, as the police chief, ought to buy more of these things. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the aftermath of Boston, and it's collapsed. This is the whole world is looking at this as a joke. Anyway, CNN is out there. They're still trying to find anything they can do to keep Boston as the top coverage of the story, and without simply repeating what they've repeated for the last 2 weeks, which people are starting to burn out on. So CNN has been running this show, this story all day about the bomb-sniffing dogs and how they can smell the vapors coming off of explosives, and they're trained to sit, and they're showing these cute little puppies and the dogs going through shopping malls, sniffing at people's rear ends. Kind of a little uncomfortable thought there. And basically, it's a puff piece. You know, if you're in a police department, you must go out and buy one of our specially trained bomb-sniffing dogs and hire one of our specially trained bomb-sniffing dog handlers. And it's a big sales pitch. And the problem is that these dogs are not really very good. When they're actually deployed in the field, there is a huge, hideous record of false positives. And in some cases, during actual tests, blind tests where the handlers don't know the test is happening, they get right on past. And research has shown that what's going on here is the dogs are not always responding to a smell. They're responding to their handler's body language. Because when the handler knows they're going after a backpack with a dummy explosive in it for training purposes, he walks a certain way, he acts a certain way, his entire body says, I know we're going to find something, and it turns out that's what the dog is keying off. When he sees the handler walk this way, he knows that if he sits, he will get a treat. And that's why the dogs aren't working. And of course, certainly they did not work in Boston, and they did have them there. And any explosive that is encased in a pressure cooker, or even just several layers of plastic bagging, doesn't give off aromas. This is about as genuine and legitimate as that bozo in Great Britain who was buying these $20 golf ball finder novelties and reselling them as improvised explosive device detectors for $40,000 each. And everybody bought them. The U.S. government bought them. Great Britain bought them. They gave them to the soldiers, and the soldiers are out there saying, oh, says there's no bombs around here. Boom. And they finally threw this guy in jail. Major, major fraud. And, of course, inevitably, in this time of austerity and sequestration and deprivation, we're seeing all these agencies saying, oh, you can't cut our funding now. Look how important we are needed to deal with situations like Boston. And they're talking about, oh, we would have been better prepared if you hadn't cut our funding. So the security industrial complex is having a field day on this stuff. They really, really are. Now, a little strange phenomenon in the news. Did you notice that as soon as it became clear that Boston did not succeed in angering Americans against the Muslims, that it was finally confirmed Syria has weapons of mass destruction? Well, we can see what happened in that meeting there. Oh, they're not buying the Boston bombing. What do we do to go say, let's just do weapons of mass destruction. They fell for it with Iraq. They'll fall for it again. Those American people, they're just stupid. They'll go on believing anything that we tell them there. And the other guy next to him says, are you overdosing on your SSRIs? Because you're not thinking very clearly here. So we have all these stories that popped up. Ever since it became obvious that Boston did not succeed in enraging America against those evil Muslims, all of a sudden the White House says it believes Syria has used chemical weapons. They don't know. They believe. We believe Syria has chemical weapons. We believe there's a Santa Claus. We believe there's an Easter Bunny. We believe in the imaginary playmate in the sky. And we will conduct our behavior as if these things we believe in were real. And, of course, my response to that is, if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. And we're seeing this ramp up. Remember, last year, Obama was promising Netanyahu that unless Iran bowed down, destroyed its entire peaceful nuclear infrastructure, and did as it was told by Israel, that we would be in Iran by June. And here we are a week away from May, and they need to go into Syria as the last stepping stone for the war in Iran. So they're ramping up plans for a military intervention in Syria. The incursion is imminent. Resources are being put into position around there. The Fifth Fleet seems to be sailing in there. The Kearsarge is sailing in there. All of these facilities. And it's all fabricated. It is, in fact, a repeat of Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And apparently the government is so overdosed on these prescription antidepressants they have to be taking to deal with the stress of what they're doing. They really do think you, the American people, are going to fall for that same lie a second time. Or maybe they're just presuming that because you are a loyal American, you will believe the bovine excrement. Because if you refuse to believe the bovine excrement, the terrorists will win. McCain is even trying to fan this thing along, saying that Obama is looking for excuses not to intervene in Syria. He's out there, he's echoing Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, Syria has crossed the red line. They've used sarin gas on their own people. We have sort of something kind of that maybe that looks like proof. And that's good enough to go there. And I imagine that for the covert operatives, they're out there saying, we went to all this trouble to fake a sarin gas attack, and the president won't go for it? What's the point of a good false flag attack if people aren't going to believe it? So, Mr. McCain, I'll tell you what, and this is what I'm going to say to every one of those war hawks out there. If you really believe that Assad used sarin gas on his own people, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. We ran out of the camo BDUs here, but here's a bright orange jumpsuit left over from Abu Ghraib. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we're going to call Syria and tell them you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. But after that whopper we were all told about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, you will forgive us if we sit this one out and keep our kids safe and healthy and alive at home. Going to grab a phone call here. Tim in Hawaii. Aloha, brah. What's up?
I just wanted to let you know, I sent you some information a couple weeks ago about the Kanaka Garden here in Hilo.
Oh, yeah, I did put that up.
Well, we're having a big old party tomorrow. We're replanting the garden that the DLNR tore out, and we still haven't got any of the things that they confiscated back.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to have a big giant party tomorrow from noon until POW, and we invited the DLNR chiefs, the mayor, the police chief, everybody down to come down to the same level, no matter what their, thoughts on the whole idea. you know.
Okay, Tim, can I ask you a question? The last time you sent me the URL to an online announcement that had directions, maps, and times, if you can email that to me again, I'll repost it to whatreallyhappened.com for the benefit of our Hawaii readers who are in a position to come on down and join you, okay?
Yep, that sounds great. I appreciate it, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And getting back to Syria, I mean, everybody's piling on, oh, we've got to have a war with Syria. We've got to get this world war going before the Ponzi scheme central bank collapses and those pesky voters and citizens blame us for the mess, as they so richly deserve. Dianne Feinstein is out there. We need strong UN action in response to Syria's chemical weapons use. Okay, Dianne, if you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. Here's your orange jumpsuit. Watch your head climbing into the plane. We're going to call Syria and tell them you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. Fool me once. Shimon Peres is out there making statements that Iran in open war with Israel. No, they aren't. Iran has not invaded another country in over 200 years. But Peres is saying, Iran is in open war with us. Really, Shimon? I don't see any bomb craters. I don't see any Iranian uniformed troops coming across your border. We've seen Israel flying into Syria and bombing Damascus. And, of course, he's out there repeating that thing, that Syrian chemical weapons are a threat to Israel. And, of course, they said exactly the same thing about Iran. Iran's weapons of mass destruction, for which there's no proof, is a threat to Israel. They said the same thing about Iraq. Remember when Israel went up and bombed Iraq's civilian power station at Osirak? And their excuse was, they're building weapons of mass destruction there, and they are a threat to Israel, and we have a right to go in and blow up their power station. And then following the invasion of Iraq, international inspectors went to the ruins of the civilian power station, and they gave it a good going over. It was a power station. There was no clandestine nuclear weapons lab underneath it. Israel is batting zero in actually finding nuclear weapons of mass destruction in other countries. Maybe they're projecting their own guilt, because we know Israel is, in fact, a nuclear-armed state. They were trying to sell bombs to South Africa. That's been documented. Even Israel's own media acknowledges there is a bomb factory underneath Israel's so-called research reactor at Dimona. And maybe Israel is just projecting onto other people. Have you ever seen when there's a husband and a wife and one of them is fooling around, getting a little on the side, and the first thing they do is they come home and accuse their partner of fooling around? Don't talk to me about staying out late after work there. I know you're having an affair with the milkman. How can you do that when we owe the gas company so much money? And it's just a way of dealing with your own guilt. Because we know Israel is, in fact, the world's 6th or 4th most powerful nuclear-armed nation, depending upon who you're talking to, and nobody is going to attack Israel. Israel does all the attacking. Like I said, the last time Iran invaded another country in a war of aggression was over 200 years ago. That's just it. Israel can't go 6 months without bombing and attacking somebody. And the United States is and remains the only nation in all of history, on all of planet Earth, to actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. So who's the threat to world peace here? The United States, Israel, or Iran? It's certainly not Iran. In that category, Iran has to settle for the bronze, and it's an honorary award even at that. Now, up in Russia, Lavrov is saying we should be cautious about this claim about Syria's chemical weapons. We don't want to repeat the embarrassment of Iraq. Boy, I got to tell you what a shock it is. After the brainwashing I got when I was in grade school about how evil the Russians were and how bad the commies were and how they lusted to come over here and kill us in our sleep, it's rather amazing to see the Russians acting like the adults in the room in this situation, where Israel is saying, you should go kill Iran for us, and Washington, D.C. is saying, yes, we're going to send our children to kill Iran for you, and the Syrians, and Russia is saying, guys, can we cool it down a little bit? Let's make sure we have our facts straight before we start committing mass murder. Because good, bad, or indifferent, what you did in Iraq was based on a completely false premise. Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. They were not a threat to anybody. They were in compliance with United Nations resolutions, a claim Israel cannot repeat, cannot make. And we've seen this all before. It's the same rush to war and propaganda campaign that we saw going into Iraq. And I think there's a lot of agendas being served by the Boston bombing, but I think first and foremost it was supposed to be the new 9/11, where America would stand up and say, we're not interested in the truth and the facts, we've got to go kill the Muslims. And it didn't work. It failed miserably. And they wasted something like $300 million of your tax money putting on this little theatrical presentation. Not counting payments to the actual bombers, whoever they may be. So we're seeing all over the place here, you know, this path, this convoluted path to chemical weapons. Okay, and it's just a week-long process. And it began on Monday. Remember what I said a little bit earlier. Did you notice that as soon as it became obvious that the Boston bombing false flag was not succeeding in motivating Americans to throw their babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets, all of a sudden we're back to weapons of mass destruction. They've got weapons of mass destruction. Same thing we've been hearing over and over again. On Monday, Chuck Hagel was in Israel talking to Israel's Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon. Nobody mentions chemical weapons in Syria. They still thought the Boston bombing false flag was working. Then on Tuesday, Israeli Brigadier General Itai Brun delivers a speech in Tel Aviv claiming that Syria has repeatedly used chemical weapons. Not just now, not just on their own. It's a repeat. They have been doing it all along. Then later on that same day, Secretary of State John Kerry calls Netanyahu to ask about this accusation, and Netanyahu says, I really can't confirm this at this point. So even Netanyahu was saying, no, we don't have any evidence about this. And then Wednesday, Kerry is out there saying, it is kind of weird that when he was in Israel, nobody mentioned this at all, and Netanyahu won't confirm. And then all of a sudden, yesterday, Thursday, the White House believes Syria has used chemical weapons, and Hagel says, yes, I believe it too. It doesn't get more obvious than that. The Boston bombing false flag craters, and they fall back on that tired, old, worn-out lie, oh, nation we intend to invade has weapons of mass destruction, and if you are a loyal, brain-dead American, you will believe the bovine excrement we're shoveling at you. So give us your money and your children, and we will make the world right for private central banking. Harumph, harumph, harumph here. And again, I reposted a reprise of an article I wrote all the way back in 2003. And I called it the lie of the century. And obviously it may now have to take second place. And it is a detailed exploration of all the lies, all the phony, rigged up junk evidence. You were constantly being fed by the corporate media to convince you that Iraq was a dire threat, that any moment Iraqi weapons of mass destruction were going to appear in the subways, in the skies, in the local Walmart, in your dryer, in your washer, in your very stove. They're coming to get you. And all of it, every bit of it, was a lie. It was just a theater production with costumed actors, a script, props, and even special effects to sell you the need for more war. And they're trying it again. And then they wonder why they're not getting traction. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. A couple of stories, and then we're going to move on to some other things that we need to talk about behind all this false flag nonsense that we're getting here. There is yet another article out there now talking about this Chinese gentleman who was the victim of a carjacking by two people we are being told were these dangerous Muslim, Chechen, Iranian, right-wing, internet blogging terrorists, until they both went into a convenience store which gave this Chinese guy the opportunity to escape and run to the police and say, hey, these guys say they're the bombers, and they say they killed the cop at MIT, and the cops say, oh, well, Let's shoot to kill, shoot on sight, to heck with the Bill of Rights. Apparently, while this Chinese gentleman was with the two men we are told were the Tsarnaev brothers, they talked about girls. They talked about credit limits on students. They discussed the cool things about the Mercedes ML350. They talked about the new features in the iPhone 5, whether CDs were now obsolete. Does this sound like terrorists on the run to you? Sounds like they were trying to keep him calm and keep feeding him information and just sort of spend time with him until it was time to cut him loose and let him run off to the police with the cover story. Now, here's another interesting little story, kind of a little double standard out there. Over in Great Britain, there's a gentleman named Rhys Elliott, who basically admitted he is an internet troll who posted threats to kill 200 American citizens, which resulted in the closure of several schools here in the United States of America. And he's now admitted it. He's got his picture in the paper. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. I don't see him in an orange jumpsuit or wearing any handcuffs. Why isn't this guy in jail for threatening an act of terror? Well, you silly. He isn't Muslim. We can't use him to sell a war. We have this little lily-white guy out there terroristic threatening. It's like, remember in New York, I think it was about 2 months ago, they found these two very successful, prominent Jewish individuals with bomb-making supplies all over their townhouse, and the story came and went. They're the wrong ethnic group. We can't use them to push the war agenda. We're only interested in Muslim terrorists now. I'm going to grab a quick phone call. Glenn in Philadelphia. Glenn, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You mentioned the security industrial complex vendors jumping in on the bandwagon to sell drones, you know. Well, in addition, there's a report that Homeland Security, even though they already have an order in for a whole bunch of the Stryker vehicles, is also supposed to be getting a bunch of the EM50, that's Echo Mike 50 urban assault vehicles. Mm-hmm. They're geared a little more for the city streets. But
they're preparing. The U.S. federal government is preparing to declare war on the 50 states. That should be obvious after Boston. We got to take a break for station identification. America, welcome back to the show. And remember, in hour one, I was saying that the corporate media is desperate for any new angle or wrinkle where they can keep throwing Boston and Muslim in your face. Because after this long barrage of failed propaganda, people are tuning out. The overnight numbers on the TV news are definitely in decline. People are tired of looking at the same stuff over and over again. So now they're out there, they're trying to make a big story out of whether Tamerlan Tsarnaev deserves a Muslim burial. Should he be buried in this Muslim cemetery after everything, ritual after everything that he did? And you know something? Tamerlan is dead. I rather doubt he cares. And neither do I. It's just another desperate, pathetic attempt to try and find some angle to keep throwing Boston, Muslim, Boston, Muslim, Boston, Muslim. Don't think, just believe. It's a hard sell. It is a hard sell. I haven't seen the corporate media struggling this hard to control the minds of the American people since they booted Ron Paul out of the 2008 and 2012 primaries. Meanwhile, getting back to Iraq, apparently the insurgency there, meaning the Iraqi people who want their own nation back under their own government and want the Americans out, that is growing rapidly. Apparently over 200 people have been killed in the last 3 days. And it's basically these Iraq troops under their U.S.-approved puppet regime are out there having to crush down and oppress the Iraqi people who are not at all happy with what's happened to their country. Remember back, along with the lies about weapons of mass destruction, we were all told that the people of Iraq would be so grateful to be saved from the evil tyrant Saddam Hussein that they would welcome the invading troops with kisses and flowers. And you remember they actually showed on the cover of Time magazine this Iraqi planting a big wet smooch onto one of the American soldiers. And then they blew it because when the next Newsweek came out, It was the same Iraqi guy planting a big wet smooch on another invading American. So it made it obvious this guy was somebody's intelligence asset out there. It's all theater. All theater. We're going to grab another phone call here real quick. Jim in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. This is, I've got to tell you this. My grandson is in 6th grade, and I was talking to him today, and he said they were teaching him in school that Israel is fighting, I wrote this down, Muslims in the Middle East from controlling economics, oil, and terrorism. I thought that was really something, you know?
You know, I'm kind of old-fashioned. I always thought schools were supposed to be about arithmetic and reading and science and, you know, things that you could actually use to earn a living with. And yes, when I was in school, there was a certain degree of indoctrination. We got all the film strips about how great the Federal Reserve was and how evil the communists were. But again, Israel has taken over our educational system. They're doing it at the college level. They're clearly doing it here at the grade school level. One more time before we hit the commercial break, would you repeat what it is your 6-year-old is being taught in school right now?
I said, and I wrote this down when I talked to him, okay? Israel is fighting Muslims in the Middle East from controlling economics, terrorism, and from terrorists from the oil countries. Yeah, that's just what, and I'm sure, I don't know if he got it right, but, you know,
it sounds about like what Israel's propaganda is out there, is they're playing victim. Oh, we've got to... listen, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Jim.
Thank you, Michael. Bye now.
When I come back, though, I do have one response to what you just said, and it's an important one. We'll be right back. Aloha, welcome back to the show, and all I can say is the corporate media is getting desperate on this Boston thing. CNN just ran a clip of somebody they claim is the carjacking victim, and who's definitely not Chinese. He actually bears a resemblance to Tamerlan, and he's got this really lousy haircut. Looks like somebody took a hedge trimmer to his hair to try and make it look like the naked man in the video. So they're getting ready to try and resell the idea that the naked man in the video was Tamerlan, which is what they've been saying for all week. But we know from other reports the actual hijacking victim was Chinese. So this is another fake. They ran another sequence of the guy who supposedly lost his legs. We know he's a phony. He's been identified as a war veteran who lost his legs in the war zone, and they just poured fake blood on him and a fake makeup prosthetic. We've had this orthopedic surgeon saying the bone they stuck in there is a completely wrong bone. It is not a human leg bone. So they're raising on a busted flush on this one. Now, I want to respond to our last caller, Jim in Pennsylvania, where he's out there saying that apparently the public schools, your taxpayer-funded schools, are feeding Israeli propaganda to your children. I find it offensive when taxpayer-funded schools are used to feed U.S. government propaganda to your kids. But now they're serving this foreign government, and apparently this 6-year-old was being told that Israel is fighting the Muslims for economic control of the Mideast, and because they're all terrorists. The usual yada, 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 yada. We got the same thing about the commies when I was a kid. They're coming to kill you. They want to rip your head off and defecate down your neck and all the rest of this other stuff. Same brainwashing going on. The economic issue is very real for Israel, because all of those Arab oil nations, as part of the petrodollar deal, take the money that they are making from selling oil and gas to the United States of America, and they are pouring it back into the United States of America. They're buying treasury bonds. They're investing in American companies. It is a huge source of wealth for the American economy, and that influx of money does inevitably buy a certain degree of political support. And this is a major problem for Israel, which does nothing but take money out of the United States of America. But they want to be in control of American politics. And in the real normal world, that doesn't work. If you are giving me money, I will tend to view you very favorably and do things, little favors that you ask me to do. If you're constantly coming to me and saying, give me money, give me money, give me money, I'm going to get sick and tired of that, and I'm going to start locking the door on you. So the fact that Israel is constantly taking money out of the United States of America and still wants to be in control of American politics is a major problem. And the only way they can sustain that is to demonize those Arab nations whose money is right now propping up what is left of the American economy. And that's why they're out there trying to say, oh, those Arab oil nations, they're evil, they're bad. Well, you know something? That's one of the reasons all of these Arab oil nations are leaving the petrodollar deal. Because the deal was the United States would keep Israel under control, and Israel isn't going along with that. And now the U.S. school system, your public schools funded by your tax dollars, are feeding your children propaganda on behalf of a foreign government. That is pretty sick. All right. The United Nations has approved 12,000 additional troops for Mali. We've got to invade Mali because they've got Al-Qaeda and they've got sarin gas and they've got nuclear weapons. No, what they've got is gold. Remember the timetable of this? Germany asks the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve to return Germany's gold bullion, and the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve go, hang on a minute, it's going to take us a while. And 1 week later, France invades Mali, which happens to be the third largest gold-producing nation in all of Africa. War for profit does not get more obvious than that. And now the UN is going to throw on in, which means some of your kids are going to go in there. We're going to save Mali from those terrible gold mines. And I'm sure they will give the Malians all kinds of stacks of paper and ink in exchange for their gold. The problem was, the reason Mali was being invaded for their gold is because up until the invasion, Mali was selling most of their gold to China. Because when you take Chinese currency, you can go back to China and you can buy things with it. Manufactured goods. You can't do that with the United States anymore. We don't have much of anything anybody wants to buy. Not even our weapons systems. Look at the disaster that the F-35 is turning out to be, or the F-22. So that's the reason for the war in Mali and the war in all these other countries, to force them back to selling their natural resources only for the U.S. dollar, to return the world to Bretton Woods. And the world clearly does not want to go. So let's talk a little bit about these drone strikes that are going on there. The Obama administration is still blocking congressional inquiries into what the legal foundation, what the constitutional basis is for the president to simply order a drone to go into a country with which we're not officially at war and just blow people up. And of course the reality is there isn't any. The Constitution does not allow the president to simply haul off and murder people in other countries, and that's what it is. Obama's a murderer. He doesn't push the button himself, but he's the mastermind. More than a murderer, he's a serial killer. And there's a former U.S. drone operator, Brandon Bryant, who's basically gone public and saying it is a horrible thing that when he joined the service, he was hoping he wasn't going to have to kill anybody, and he might have to kill one or two people. And he says he was just killing crowds. He was killing crowds from the safety of this little control room. And it felt like cowardice. And I think that's the reason the Department of Defense wanted to come up with this medal for the drone pilots to remind them that they're doing good things, that they're brave warriors, that it's technically combat, even though they get to go home to their families every night. And of course the medal has now been withdrawn because it is a slap in the face to everybody who's actually on the front lines dodging bullets and improvised explosive devices. Now, a very alarming story is that the U.S. government wants to create 6 drone test centers across the United States of America. We're going to have, all across the U.S., we're going to have these drone test centers. Why 6? Isn't one enough if all you're doing is testing the drones? No. The reason they have 6, they're going to build 6 all across the United States of America, is these are the locations from which drones will be deployed against the American people. That's the only reason they need 6. because these drones do have a finite range. They can't refuel in the air. And so these drone test centers are actually the deployment places for the drones to come and get you, because you will not do as you're told by the federal government. You will not believe as you're told to believe. You will not bow down before Imperial Israel and learn to hate the Muslims like we have tried to teach you. That's the only reason for 6 of these facilities. They're not for testing. They're for launching attacks. Now, down in Venezuela, as you know, they had a very tightly contested election, followed by riots. Even before the election and the riots had begun, Venezuela had announced they had detected foreign agents, provocateurs, coming in with the intention of disrupting the election results and trying to bring a U.S.-approved regime into power in Venezuela after the years of embarrassment trying to oust Hugo Chavez. That pesky Hugo Chavez who thought the wealth of the nation ought to belong to the people of the nation. What kind of a silly idea is that? We need somebody in there who'll sell it all to the bankers and American oil companies and stop selling Venezuela's oil to China for that gosh darn gold back yuan. Well, apparently Venezuela has arrested one of the agent provocateurs, and ta-da-ta-da, you're not really surprised, it's a U.S. citizen, Timothy Hallett Tracy. Codenamed Gringo, or at least that's what Venezuela codenamed him, and he's linked to all of these far-right groups that were trying to destabilize Venezuela through all of these violence actions and riots after the election. So they caught an American agent down there, and I hope they put him on public trial before the world, because I think the world has outgrown the age where the U.S. government just feels they have a right to go into anybody else's country at any time, overthrow the government, put in a pro-U.S. regime, and loot the place until it's driven to revolution. At which point the U.S. government comes back and says, oh, they just hate us for our freedoms. We didn't do anything wrong. They hate us because we have Disneyland. They hate us because we have McDonald's. They hate us for our freedoms. They hate us because we dress funny, or whatever it is they're coming up with. It's the same repeating pattern. We saw it in Cuba under Batista, the Philippines under Marcos, Iran under the Shah of Iran, 1953. The U.S. has been playing this game for decades, and the world knows it, and the world is tired of it. And the U.S. is racing on a busted flush here. Josh Bolton is out there screaming, Israel's situation with Iran is very perilous. They're in danger. Iran's going to come in. And again, Iran hasn't invaded another country in 200 years. So Josh Bolton, same message to you. If you really feel that way, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. Watch your head climbing into the plane. We're going to call Iran and tell them you're on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. Back at Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And checking with the stock market, the powers that be, the riggers, the high-frequency traders, the plunge protection team, whatever you call them, are busy doing their usual Friday massaging the markets, trying to get that happy ending for Friday, and they're probably going to get it, but not by much. It's all rigging and everything like this. Now, there continue to be reports from all around the globe of massive shortages in physical gold. The physical market is very tight. There are shortages reported all across Asia. People are trying to get physical gold, rather, and they can't find it. Apparently, J.P. Morgan's eligible gold resources plummeted 65% in just 24 hours to an all-time low. This smackdown of gold prices, which appears to have been an attempt to spook ordinary people into rushing down and dumping all of their gold at the coin shops and brokerages and those we buy gold places that are cropping up all over America, backfired badly. Everybody's grabbing physical. They're taking advantage of the low prices. And by the way, the low price is already eroding. Gold is going right back up to where it was before. And we know that the people who've been shorting the gold physical and silver physical markets are in trouble. There's rumors of shortages in COMEX. We are seeing over in Europe where physical gold brokerages are defaulting on their gold futures contracts. They're trying to buy them off with ink and paper stuff. There was that CEO who tried to get his allocated gold out of his account. He was simply given a warehouse receipt and said, see, this proves your gold is safe. Go away. Don't bother us any longer. Gerald Salenti is out there saying currency and gold wars are already ongoing. The price of gold is being rigged, and that certainly appears to be the case. We know that British authorities are already investigating if the London gold and silver fix is being rigged, and we know it is. We're going to grab a phone call here. Robert in Brooklyn. Aloha, Robert.
Yes.
There you are.
Hello, Michael.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, are you supposed to ask me? Okay. Hours after the bombing, the guy upstairs who's supposed to be a cop gets robbed of 2 guns. I found this out days later. Yeah, don't laugh. Isn't it? I don't believe in coincidence. You know, that's bullshit. Like, you know.
Well, please don't curse on this here radio.
I'm not cursing. No.
Well, use a euphemism. Yeah, bovine excrement. That's acceptable here. Okay. Because remember, we may be showering white-hot flaming death on innocent people in countries we're not at war with, but we don't say dirty words to prove we are a just and moral people.
Ooh. Okay. This is the truth. I was visited after the 3 Russian women comes down the next night. They tell me they were robbed. Mm-hmm. This actually happened to me. And I didn't even know, all this noise from them walking back and forth and everything like that, it was like King Kong, several months ago, I thought they were rehearsing to rob an apartment. Because it was a woman with high heels, his fiancée probably.
Okay.
And they're running back and forth and everything. Okay. So I called the building manager and made an appointment the next day. And then this is prior to finding out about this robbery.
Okay, we're almost out of time in this segment. Can you sort of get to the point or conclusion you're trying to make, because I don't want to cut you off?
This thing with the 2 guns missing is a very timely thing. It may have some connection with what happened in Boston. That's what I'm saying.
And it may not here, but I think the important point to take away from this is that criminals will steal guns even from police officers, which is why all this registration and background check isn't going to do a thing to stop criminals from getting guns. And I think that's really what we get from this thing. All right, we're coming to the end of the segment. I got some more stories I got to get to on the economy. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, another story that is coming out from the Trenches World Report. It is being confirmed the central banks have been buying huge blocks of stock to keep the stock prices up so they can wave the soaring Dow at you and say, see, the economy is really very good. And what they're pointing out in this article is that 67% of the companies in the key stock indices reported their corporate earnings were able to beat earnings estimates, but only 44% of them were able to exceed the revenue expectations of the Wall Street analysts. So they're asking the question, why are the key stock indices, and by that, the stocks from which these Dow Jones, NASDAQ, S&P averages are calculated, why are their indices rising when the underlying reasons for the rise, corporate earnings and growth, are diminishing? Well, it's because they're using market forces. The more stocks they buy, the greater the demand appears to be, the prices go up. But of course, now these central banks are trapped because these huge stock purchases are on their balance sheets. If there is a major market downturn, these banks will be instantly insolvent. And that's the reason the Federal Reserve is continuing to print all this newly created money and give it to these banks so these banks can go on buying more stocks. It's a complete hoax, fraud. We'll be back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here in the corporate media. They're back to all Boston all the time. Boston Muslim, Boston Muslim. It's a full court press. They're trying to find a lie that will work, that will get traction with the American people, to get you to be willing to throw your children onto the bayonets of whoever it is we're going to be invading next. And it doesn't look to me like it's succeeding. I am smelling panic in the wind out there. Now, back to the financial news. Over at Rolling Stone, Matt Taibbi, who certainly has my respect, and you ought to be paying attention to him, he's come out with another story. And this gets back to the idea that the rigging that is going on in the financial industry is pandemic. It is everywhere. We understand the rigging of the ratings on the mortgage-backed securities by the Wall Street rating agencies. We all remember the huge scandal where LIBOR was being rigged. Okay? And now Matt Taibbi has blown the whistle on another one. Apparently, and interestingly enough, he starts off with an apology to the conspiracy theorists of the world. And he's saying, we owe you an apology. You were right. They really are doing this stuff here. And he's specifically talking about an economic indicator, the ISDA fix. This is a benchmark number used around the world to calculate the prices of interest rate swaps. It's another derivative, and it's used by big cities, major corporations, and governments to manage their debt by sort of buying hedges against fluctuations in the interest rates. And the scale of their use is massive. These interest rate swaps are about a $380 trillion with a T dollar market, which means any manipulation would affect assets worth about 100 times the size of the United States federal budget. Even a fraction of a percent of manipulation of this ISDA fix will attain billions of dollars to the riggers. And remember, this money just does not come out of thin air. Somebody somewhere pays for it all. With a higher interest rate on their debt they're trying to service, which means some company is going to say, oh, the interest on our debt went up. We have to put off hiring new people. We have to put off new capital acquisitions. These things, when you start manipulating this money that is pouring into the pockets of the riggers, results in lost jobs, lost employment opportunities, lost product development. Entire businesses can be driven out of business by these shifts in the interest rate. And it is a gigantic, gigantic scandal, and it makes LIBOR look like kids who wrap Scotch tape around their fingers backwards and filch a quarter out of the church collection plate in terms of scale. This is the new biggest economic fraud in history. We thought the mortgage-backed securities were. Then it was LIBOR. Now it's ISDA fix. And it tells us what else in the financial system is being rigged. And of course, if you go back to the fact that all of these private central banks are Ponzi schemes, you understand the entire banking financial sector is a criminal operation. It bribes its way into control of nations' economies, and it keeps control of nations' economies through assassinations, blackmail, bribery, and, when necessary, wars. Remember what started the War of 1812. United States Congress refused to renew the charter for the first bank in the United States. The Rothschilds literally threatened the government of the United States. If they did not renew that charter, they would be in a war. Congress stood firm. Next year, War of 1812. And so now we have yet another huge scandal. Matt has done a really good write-up about that. And as I said, he started by apologizing to us conspiracy theorists. And Matt, you are forgiven. Your penance is 10 Bloody Marys and 5 Hello Dollies. All righty, let's see. More and more we're hearing about these banker haircuts. They're trying to sell you the idea that it is perfectly legal for the bank in which you have your savings account to go into your savings account, even your safety deposit box, and grab whatever is there so that the most holy and sacrosanct ledger is still black at the bottom. Started with Cyprus. They're trying to sell it that this is what happens. You know, during hard economic times, you've already paid higher taxes. Your taxes have bailed out the banks. You're living under austerity, and still it's not enough. You must do more to protect those banks, and that means your savings accounts are wide open. And they're already out there propagandizing that this is a perfectly legal thing for them to do. And there was a very interesting blog put up at whatreallyhappened.com by one of the members. And he says, you just ask yourself these questions. If you put your money with a lawyer as a stakeholder, and he uses the money without your consent for some other purpose, has the lawyer committed a crime? Yeah. Under U.S. law, he's committed a major crime. If you store a bushel of wheat or cotton in a warehouse, and you're paying storage fees, and the owner of the warehouse takes that wheat or cotton and sells it, or rents it out, or in some other way misuses it, has the warehouse owner committed a crime? Yes, they have. If you put your money with a stock or commodity broker, and the broker uses that money for other purposes, contrary to your instructions, has the broker committed a crime? Yes, that broker has under U.S. laws. So this idea that you can put your money in a savings account in the bank and the bank can simply take it to satisfy their other debt obligations, that this is somehow legal and normal, of course not. There is no precedent to say that the bank in which you have your savings account is able to simply grab your money and use it to settle their other business obligations. When the bank reaches that point, the bank, for all intents and purposes, has failed, and it should be allowed to fail. Just because it's a bank should not make it immune to the normal laws of business and the law. Obviously, in the United States, that's quite the contrary. And back when the whole mortgage-backed security fraud blew up, the Bush administration set a policy, continued by Obama, that the Wall Street criminals behind the mortgage-backed security fraud were never going to be arrested, never going to be investigated, never tried, never sent to jail. And of course, because they incentivized this kind of criminality, we're seeing the same thing going on. Instead of mortgage bundles, now they're doing student loan bundles. They're doing car loan bundles. They're doing bundles of security contracts. Everybody bundles. They're playing the same games over and over again. And behind it all, of course, is the fact that when you have a privately owned central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, by design, debt increases faster than the money supply. You are trapped in this artificially created debt, and that debt is used to control you. You owe me this much money, therefore you must go out and do what I say. And while I can print up this ink and paper stuff whenever I need it, you have to go out and do what somebody who has the ink and paper tells you to do to get any of it. That's your slave chain. It's rule by debt. And it is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. The only legitimate form of governance is self-governance. That's what the American Revolution was all about. We fought a war to be free of this kind of banker shenanigans, only to have our own government, in exchange for 30 pieces of silver, sell us back into slavery of the same system. And President Woodrow Wilson admitted in his own diary, by doing so, by signing the Federal Reserve Act, he had destroyed the United States of America. And he turned us from a nation governed by the majority opinion of the people to a nation under the control of a small group of dominant financiers. He knew he did it, but he was willing to do it because that was the price to become the president. When you make that Oval Office so attractive, people will do anything to get into it, including selling out the people of the nation, for whom that Oval Office is supposed to represent governance of the people, by the people, and for the people. So, over in Spain, they're taking a somewhat different approach to their problems. There are now massive riots around the Spanish Parliament. And they have a very simple message. It isn't end austerity. It isn't balance the budget. It's get out. That's what they're saying in the Spanish Parliament. You, the government, are fired, 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 fired. I hope they succeed. If they do succeed, it means Spain will default on their debts, and that will start triggering the derivatives firestorm on Wall Street. And it's all going to come crashing down at the same time. And it's going to be very difficult. Going to be a lot of confusion. But we, the human race, will rise phoenix-like out of the ashes. And we have an opportunity to build a brand new human civilization without the slavery of private central bankers. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America or a blueprint for new human civilization, rule number 1 is no private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Rule number 2, no private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. Rule number 3, no private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. There will be no end of carpetbaggers running around in the chaos and confusion saying, I got a brand new government for you here and a brand new bank. Just sign your name right here. We'll get you all set up. We'll start the whole system all over again and all will be well. And no, it won't. Anybody who stands up and starts saying we need a new privately owned central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, you give them a good solid coat of tar and feathers and you run them out of town on a rail. Unfinished redwood. It leaves really nasty splinters in those tender regions. Spain has the right idea. Now, I want to talk about something, and by the way, we're about 15 minutes away from Claire joining us, as she normally does here. This one really ticked me off, and it's going to tick you off. And again, we had to go to the British press to learn about this. The United States Department of Agriculture is printing and distributing a Spanish-language leaflet that tells illegal Mexican immigrants they can collect food stamp benefits without having to talk about their immigration status. We don't care if you're illegal. Come on in and get your food stamps. Are you kidding me? The food stamp money they are handing out now is not keeping up with inflation-driven increases in food prices. Around here, in Oahu, the food stamp money runs out in the 3rd week of every month. Local groups, we have to step in and fill in that 4th week, or these kids are going to school hungry. And if you are hungry, you don't have enough sugar in your brain, you can't learn, you can't think. And what this means is that American children who are legally here, children who were born here, are going hungry in that 4th week while Washington spends your tax money to advertise to illegal aliens fresh across the border to come on in and sign up to that food stamp program and chow down on that food that in all rights ought to be going to our own kids. And no, this is not racism. I have no problem with anybody who comes here from another country who goes through the legal process to become a citizen. Welcome. Have fun. Hope you think it's a great place here. The Tsarnaev brothers did, apparently. They were glad to be in the United States of America, contrary to what the corporate media is trying to tell you. But this advertising campaign by the USDA to tell illegal aliens, here illegally, come on in and grab your share of the food stamp money. They're incentivizing criminal behavior. Are these people on SSRIs? They got to be on drugs to even think of such a thing. We're hearing all these stories about FAA furloughs, USDA food inspector furloughs because the government is running out of money and Washington, D.C. is spending more money to advertise to the illegal aliens, come on in, we'll give you money. What is wrong with these people? I feel like grabbing them by the ears and staring in their eyes and saying, is there anybody in there? Now, in response to mounting public pressure, there is a new bill being introduced to Congress that would require genetically modified food labeling in the United States of America. It's called the Genetically Engineered Food Right to Know Act. It is introduced by Senator Barbara Boxer and Representative Peter DeFazio. Given Monsanto's financial and political clout, I don't think it has a snowball's chance in Al Gore's warming world of ever passing. There may be a way around it. If you go to your supermarket and you buy products, you've probably already seen these little tiny symbols that are on the label that represent they are certified kosher to meet the Jewish religious requirements for food. And a lot of people talk about it, oh, we're paying extra. when we buy this food that's certified kosher, because there's a whole process to go through. But you know something? It's not such a bad thing. It turns out kosher certification bans all GMO ingredients. So if this bill about GMO labeling fails, all you have to do is go down and shop in the kosher section, and you can avoid the GMO foods. That's a really cool idea. And if everybody starts flocking to the kosher certified section of their supermarket, these other companies that are putting GMO in the food, they're going to get the message. We do not want to eat their dangerous laboratory experiments. Somebody just sent me this wonderful picture. I haven't had a chance to put it up at the website. Somebody took 2 ears of corn, one GMO and one organic, and just mounted them outside, side by side. One is labeled GMO and the other is labeled non-GMO, and they left it there for the squirrels to eat. The squirrels ate the organic, natural corn. They barely touched the GMO. Even the squirrels understand this is bad stuff. One more story before the commercial break, and this one is absolutely disgusting. Down in Chile, a religious cult that believes in this whole end times thing sacrificed a 3-day-old baby in fire because they believed she was the Antichrist. And the end of the world is at hand. 3-day-old baby. Taped her to a board, taped her mouth, threw her in a bonfire. Praise the imaginary playmate. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you watching on Justin TV, the lovely Lady Claire has stepped in a few minutes early. She's going to be joining us here on the mic in a couple of seconds. But I wanted to make a comment as we close out hour number 2. I'm turning off the corporate media. They're not telling me anything new. It's just all Boston all the time, along with this thing about Syria has weapons of mass destruction, same old stuff all over again. And we're seeing basically they're trying all these trial balloons. Remember a couple of weeks ago, it was North Korea. They're going to nuke us. They're getting ready to fire a rocket. They're going to explode a nuclear bomb over the U.S. and fry all your computers. And it was just constant pounding, pounding, pounding. And they didn't get any traction with that with the American people. We're out there saying that, yeah, we heard of this before with Iraq, and we've been hearing it all over again with Iran, and it just doesn't work. And so then they said, well, they're not buying North Korean nuclear terror. Let's blow up the Marathon. And they blew up the Marathon and horrible blood and stuff, and now we've busted them for the fact that most of what they're showing us on the corporate media are the actors hired for the ongoing bomb drill. And we busted them with the fake blood and the fake prosthetics, and we busted them for the naked man, and it's just all falling apart. So now, as the Boston story crumbles, we're back to Syria has weapons of mass destruction. They're just out there trying to, and they're just, let's try this, let's try that. What is going to, what is going to resonate with the American people? What are the focus groups saying? It's all marketing and PR. There's no real threat out there. They're trying to sell you a new world war. We've had 2. Didn't like the product, can't take it back for a refund. I think we should maybe not buy it this time. All righty, so lovely Lady Claire, what is it you would like to talk about first?
Well, I'd like to talk about an article that I saw on Russia Today, which indicates that hundreds of Jordanians have taken to the streets to rally against the deployment of U.S. troops to the Syrian border. These people are not dumb. They know that it's not in the best interest of the Hashemite kingdom or Jordan for there to be an American presence there. It's inviting trouble.
Well, so, it's kind of like Soldier Motel.
Yeah.
The American soldiers move in, but they don't move out.
Yes. And I would really like to hear, and I don't think it's going to happen because John Kerry hasn't met me, and I don't think that's going to happen in the near term.
I rather doubt it.
But if there was an astute reporter with, let's say, the male attributes to ask the question, I would love to hear what Kerry would have to say if he was directly challenged. What has Sergei Lavrov, your counterpart from Russia, said if the U.S. and or Israel invades Syria? What precisely is the Russian government prepared to do?
Well, the last I heard is Lavrov said Russia will support Syria and Iran. Mm-hmm. They'll turn them into the new Vietnam, and they'll just let the United States burn itself out in a war of attrition. The United States lacks the resources to win.
Yep.
And Russia can definitely do it, and that is why I am so concerned that we all unite to stop this. Mm-hmm. Because between now and the point where the U.S. government finally realizes they can't win a conventional world war.
No, they can't.
They will turn those little brass keys in the silos, and it's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock.
Right.
They are on a dangerous course. They risk incinerating the entire planet in nuclear fire, all to prop up these little tiny pieces of ink and paper that they believe represents something worth sending your children to die for.
Yeah, it's very scary right now, looking at the ramp up, looking at the timetable that you were giving.
Okay, we got to take a break. This is our station break. We'll be back with Claire after these words. America, welcome back to hour number 3 of our show, and of course the lovely lady Claire is sitting behind me. Before we get back to her, I do want to comment on a follow-up to the story about the protesters in Spain surrounding the parliament and telling the government basically, get out, you're doing a terrible job. And good for them. But apparently, along with getting rid of the current regime in Spain, the Spanish people are saying they want to leave the European Monetary Union. They want out of the euro. Again, we could easily see the United States go into Spain to help keep that government and banking system in power. Because if the Spanish government falls, and the new government coming in is saying, we're out of the euro, we're out of the European Union, that will start a cascade of debt defaults all across Europe, all of which are tied into these credit default swaps being sold by Wall Street.
Now, Mike, I have a question for you on that.
Sure.
Is Spain not a member of NATO?
Spain is, in fact, a member of NATO.
So wouldn't it maybe be a little bit more logical that they would look to NATO rather than the U.S. per se? I mean, that would look awfully kludgy to have U.S. troops in the streets of Spain.
Spain can't go to NATO for troops in the streets of Spain because NATO is not being attacked from without by Russia or the enemy.
All right.
So whatever, any military intervention is going to look kludgy no matter what happens.
Okay.
And it could be a U.S. covert intervention to
Yes.
send in CIA assassins to kill the leaders of the protest movement.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if the Spanish government falls, if they step down, and a new incoming Spanish government leaves the euro, Spain will have defaulted on its debts. There's no way they can pretend it's not a default, and that's
Right.
going to start this whole implosion of the credit default swaps that Wall Street sold against Europe's debts. Wall Street does not have the cash reserves to pay off those credit default swaps.
Nope.
Gee, I wonder where they plan on getting that money.
Yep.
Okay, and again, only have as much money in the bank as you need to cover your obligations and keep the rest under your own control at home. Take advantage of the temporarily depressed prices of physical silver, physical gold. Grab what you can and keep it under your control. The banks are not safe. They're already out there trying to sell the idea that it is legal for the bankers to loot your savings account and your safety deposit boxes to keep the most holy and sacrosanct banks in business for another few days.
Absolutely.
What's next on your list?
I'd like to talk about Obama and the game of drones, pun intended. The events of Boston were horrific and terrible, and any kind human person, your heart has to go out to people who really got hurt and the families of the people who died. But what happened in Boston is what happens on a consistent basis in those countries where President Obama believes he has the right and moral authority and legal justification to bomb the bad guys, the alleged bad guys.
Yeah, alleged,
Yeah,
suspect bad
yeah.
guys. They've not had their day in
No.
court. There has been no evidence presented of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There's no jury. It is simply they're out there in these countries with which we are not officially at war.
Right.
And the U.S. operatives are out there handing out money saying, we've got reward money, name a terrorist, and you get all these freshly printed paper and ink things.
Yep.
And, some guy who just needs the money, or some guy who's, his business competition. 2 bakers on the town square, and one baker names the other baker as a terrorist. Boom, drone strike destroys him, his shop, and a bunch of his customers. And now the sole surviving baker has all the business to himself.
Got the monopoly.
Got the monopoly. And we got to take a break for commercials. We'll come back to this after these words. Aloha, welcome back to the show here. And I just got a listener email saying, how come we're not hearing about that Texas fertilizer explosion. A lot more people were killed on that. Much more property damage. It just sort of came and went. Obama went down there and got his photo op speaking at the funerals.
But that was an industrial accident.
It was an industrial accident.
Yeah.
It can't be blamed on Muslims.
Nope.
It can't be used to sell the war.
Nope.
It's actually an embarrassment for the federal government because OSHA cited this factory for improper storage of these highly explosive chemicals.
And it never got fixed.
Never went back.
Yeah.
Never followed up. It's like Minerals Management Service with the Deepwater Horizon, SEC with Bernie Madoff. It's a huge embarrassment. Right now, what we're seeing on the corporate media is, if it makes Muslims look bad, it's headline news. If it makes the government and corporations look bad, it's out of the rotation. You dare say anything bad about corporations, you will be fired. Which, as like those Fox News reporters on the bovine growth hormone lawsuit. What is it you want to talk about next?
Well, I'd like to continue with the concept of the game of drones. There was a writer who said, how could someone be so evil with the two explosions? But the two explosions, Mike, are very simply the quote-unquote double tap, as it's called, by the military when the second bombing hits the first responders in these foreign countries.
Well, I'm not sure that's accurate because the image that seems to be appearing from Boston is that the explosion right across the street from the Boston Library was just smoke and black powder.
That was planned.
That was the one that was announced on the Boston Globe's tweet, a controlled explosion as part of the ongoing drill. It was only the second explosion that was set off to actually kill and wound and injure people.
Got it.
To be sold as massive terror attack.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. 3 people were killed. We don't know how many were wounded. They're claiming 200. But we know a lot of what is being shown to us in the corporate media are the hired actors with fake blood that were there for the bomb drill, and they're just trying to magnify this thing. But with every single drone strike into a foreign nation that we are not officially at war with, for every one terror suspect
who has never been given their day in court.
Never their day in court. An average of 50 innocent bystanders are killed. 50, women, children, old men, everybody are wiped out with every single one of these drone strikes. And to the American corporate media, it's no big deal. It's necessary. There's a war on terror. They're Muslims. You shouldn't care about them at all.
And what concerns me about this with President Obama's mindset that he can kill anyone, anywhere, and has the legal and moral justification.
Yes, we can kill whoever we want, wherever we want, whenever we want, and nobody can stop us.
And so, therefore, it is not that big a leap of logic for this administration to believe that they can extrajudicially kill and assassinate Americans who have not had due process here. I mean, Obama said...
They've already come out and they've said as much. And as I reported earlier in the show, it's just been announced the United States is going to start constructing 6 what they're calling drone test centers all across the United States. Now, if you're just testing drones, you only need 1 test facility. And there are, by the way, already flight test facilities. Edwards Air Force Base. Why aren't you using that for testing? How about you have, the flight test facility on the Atlantic coast? You can use those. The only reason to be building 6 of these drone facilities across the country is they are the points from which attacks against Americans are going to be launched.
They're planning on using them.
They're going to use them.
Yeah. And I mean, the prelude for that was pretty much set with the NDAA, which Obama signed, which allows the president to order the military to arrest and indefinitely incarcerate any American for, quote-unquote, giving aid and comfort to the enemy, whatever that means. The language is so loosey-goosey that it's impossible to really nail down.
And understand that right now, just talking about the Constitution is now construed as potential terrorism. And it's completely out of control. The biggest terrorist in the United States of America right now is the federal government. They're trying to terrorize you into silence with all this hollow point ammunition that they're buying, all this data snooping that's completely out of control. It looks like CISPA is going down to defeat in the Senate over privacy concerns, and yet we understand that Obama has already implemented most of it through executive order and granted blanket immunity to all of the telecommunication companies that are helping them spy on you.
So we see the stage being very carefully set. We see a massive militarization of our police department. I mean, I remember as a kid, there were such things as neighborhood cops, and you could say hi to them, and they seemed to be relatively nice, reasonable people. But my gosh, looking at all the equipment and all the toys that the police departments are getting these days, usually with grants from Homeland Security.
Meaning your tax dollars.
Yeah. I mean, Houston already has 2 weaponizable drones that were part of a grant from Homeland Security. Now, I can't believe, Michael, that they would have gotten those unless they really intended to use them and ultimately weaponize them.
Well, the drones in question down there in Houston, when we say they're weaponizable, it's basically the attachment points and the frames are already on the drone to carry a shotgun, a tear gas canister, a device that shoots taser bullets, various other things like that. Now, if you've ever seen these drones in flight, they are not stable platforms. They shake around a lot. Every little breeze shakes them back and forth. The idea that these drones can target a truly guilty individual in a crowd is ridiculous. These are terror weapons from the sky.
Yes.
They're just out there to scare everybody. Get away from the city hall. We don't want to hear your complaints about poverty and hunger anymore. It's flogging with all the modern improvements. Flogging you away back to your slave pens with the drones. That's what they're there for. By the way, have you noticed, very funny thing, at least around here, a while back we were talking about how easy it would be to bring down one of these police drones, these hovering drones, using those little cheap radio-controlled helicopters they were selling at the shopping malls. All of a sudden, all the kiosks at our shopping mall that were selling those helicopters are gone.
Not a one left, eh? That's chicken skin.
Yep.
Yes. And I'd also like to talk about, again, one of the elements of this push towards war against Syria and Iran. Israel got a really nice gift the last time Chucky Hagel was there. And that gift was a ton of weapons that were selling at discounted rates to Israel, which will enable them to see further, penetrate further into what Iran is doing. But I don't for one second, Michael, believe that Israel is going to take on Iran alone. Do you?
No. Their goal is for the American children to fight Israel's wars. What Israel is planning to do, I mean, look what they did with the attack on the USS Liberty. Yeah. Israel attacks the USS Liberty. They blame Egypt for it. Had the ship sunk, America would have been at war with Egypt. Your kids fighting wars against Israel's enemies. That's what they also tried to do with the Levant affair. When Israeli agents were blowing up British and American assets, they bombed an American diplomatic facility, planted evidence to frame Egyptian Muslims for that whole situation. This is how Israel operates. Those Israeli children are far too precious to risk in war. That's what the American kids are for. So what Israel is going to do is they will attack Iran. They'll bomb their nuclear facilities. They'll bomb as much of the military infrastructure as they can. Then they're going to skedaddle back to Israel and say, please save us from these evil Iranians. And the U.S. Senate's already voted through a resolution saying, even if Israel starts this war, the U.S. is committed to go in and put your children between Iran and Israel so your children get to stop the bullets from Iran's retaliation. In other words, the U.S. Senate has just transferred the war powers of this nation over to a foreign government.
They've outsourced it.
They've outsourced it.
And
Israel doesn't fight their own wars. They're not even very good at it. Look at the last Lebanon war. And we're giving them all these weapons. And I remember before this Chuck Hagel deal went through, they were saying, if we give Israel all these advanced weapons, they will feel less threatened by Iran and they won't start a war. Okay, this from the same government that insists you can't own certain shotguns and semi-automatic rifles because you will be hopelessly tempted to go out and do bad things with them.
Yeah, it's more than a little bit scary. And taking a look at the calendar, May 1st is coming up next week.
Yes, it is.
If we are looking at a war waged against Iran in June, there's not a lot of time. The Obama administration's running out of time.
Yeah, because last year Obama made a commitment to Netanyahu, was part of his deal to get to be president again.
Yeah.
To the effect that if Iran had not simply shut down all of their entire nuclear infrastructure, their power stations, their medical isotopes, all of those things, and groveled before Israel that the U.S. would militarily intervene in Iran. Of course, we know the U.S. real agenda has nothing to do with Iran's power station.
Yes.
The real agenda is to smash one of the last few countries on earth that do not have a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, and to shackle Iran's oil sales back to the dollar. That is the real U.S. agenda here. It's just that Israel's desire for war with Iran and the U.S. desire for war with Iran happen to overlap, and Israel's taking advantage of that. We are coming up on the end of the segment. I know we've got a caller on the line, but we're going to have to wait till after the commercial break, and then we'll take that phone call. So, again, wars are rarely started for a single reason. You just get a group of leaders and nations who all have the same idea. I would like to invade this country for whatever. And it doesn't matter what the whatever is. They're just in agreement. It's time to make war on this. And that's why we're on the road to war with Iran, which could easily mean war with China and Russia. And if you don't already know it, those two countries really do have weapons of mass destruction. Welcome back to our show. And this is kind of a really good idea. Apparently, comedian Nathan Fielder urged his fans and audience to start sending text messages back and forth pretending to be drug dealers. And apparently they're doing it. All these kids are out there saying 2 grams for $40. Of course, it's all this surveillance of social media is going nuts. It's an epidemic. They're out there. Everybody's dealing drugs. And of course, it's a big joke. It's all just a big joke. That's the reason up at the top of whatreallyhappened.com every day we have our Department of Homeland Security monitored keyword of the day. We got the list of words that the Department of Homeland Security scans for on the internet, and we put one of them up every day so that every time somebody accesses our page, that keyword is in there, and all the bells start ringing over at the Department of Homeland Security. And that's how we jam up the system here, because I don't want them peeking at me. I don't have anything to hide. I'm a private person. And we do have that Fourth Amendment still out there. We're going to grab a phone call here. Joseph in New York. Aloha, Joseph. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael and Claire.
Aloha.
This is in reference to Matt Taibbi.
Yes.
Okay. He's been writing about the banks and what the shenanigans they've been pulling for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes, he has. He's done marvelous, marvelous work.
Right. And the only problem I'm concerned about is this young man has spent about 10 years in Russia.
Okay, well,
as an athlete.
Okay,
in
well,
baseball.
What does that have to do with the price of tea in China?
It has no bearing on the price of tea in China, but he spent 10 years over there. Well, look what they did to the stories coming out about Boston and the two brothers.
Well, look, Boston is a huge hoax, and they're trying to smear them. And I agree, probably the bankers are going to try and smear Matt Taibbi as well, but the reality is everything Matt Taibbi has written for Rolling Stone has checked out. And so at this point, I think as a society, we are moving away from that willingness to ignore certain people because they're demonized with a label. For many, many years, Israel has gotten away with silencing people by saying, oh, you're just being an anti-Semite. And people would say, oh, he's an anti-Semite. I can't listen to him. He's an anti-Semite. I can't listen to this person. He's a Muslim. I can't listen to that person. He's a Democrat. I can't listen to that person. He's whatever label is used to turn your ears off. And it is an old, old trick. I'll give you a good example. Again, going back to COINTELPRO in the 1960s. The FBI put out this Black Panther coloring book. It did not come from the Black Panthers. In fact, one of the FBI's infiltrators in the Black Panthers tried to convince them to distribute this to kids. And the Black Panthers looked at it and said, are you out of your mind? This thing was filled with all of these racist, violent illustrations. It's not even a good coloring book. It's just rough sketches of black people killing police, and the police are portrayed as actual farm animal pigs. And it was just incredibly, horrific. and the FBI basically fell back on Plan B. They started mailing it to households across America, and the corporate media said, this is what the Black Panthers are up to. We actually got one when I was still living with my family in West Covina, California, white neighborhood. The first thing we should have asked is, why was this sent to our mailbox? We're not black. We don't have any blacks living around us. You know, what's going on here? But we were naive back then. We still trusted the U.S. government. We still thought the corporate media was telling us what was really going on in the world. And it came out in the 1970s that the FBI had, in fact, put this coloring book out there to anger the American people, the white people. So they stopped listening to the legitimate concerns of the black community, including, bias in society, bias in the economy, and the fact that the Vietnam draft tended to put the black kids right up there on the front lines as bullet catchers, and the white kids were kept safe in the rear echelon areas. And this is the way the government works. They demonize a label. Oh, he's a blah, blah, blah. And then from then on, the media says, you don't want to listen to them. He's a blah, blah, blah. And that's what they're doing here with this idea. Ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of people go back and forth to Russia for very benign reasons. A lot of people travel there to visit the Hermitage Museum. Doesn't mean they're evil, bad people. They're just art lovers. And so I'm not surprised, or I will not be surprised, if somebody tries to smear and demonize Matt Taibbi simply because they can't refute what he's actually saying about all these frauds. Everything he told us about LIBOR turned out to be true. Mm-hmm. Everything he told us about the mortgage-backed security fraud turned out to be true. And everything that he is telling us now about this even new, larger, more horrific fraud is probably going to turn out to be true as well.
When people cannot argue the facts, they argue with an ad hominem attack to try to smear the issue. It's like squid ink.
Well, yeah, it's an old lawyer's joke. You know, if the law's against you, argue the facts. If the facts are against you, argue the law. If both the facts and the law are against you, you call the other side names. And that is a very well-worn, well-known tactic. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more Claire after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Claire, you wanted to talk about...
I wanted us to all kind of be aware of this legislation that was initiated by dear Charlie Rangel, which was a new draft legislation. And as this push to war gets further and further, I am very concerned that if there is, and heaven forbid that it would happen, but an even bigger bang than we had in Boston. Mike, would you be willing to bet me that legislation will be rushed through at that point?
I think if Boston had gotten the public reaction that was clearly intended, that draft bill would be on the floor right now. And as I said before, because Boston did not capture the American emotions the way it was clearly intended to do, we could very easily see a new event to distract from it. And again, go back to TWA 800. U.S. Navy accidentally shoots down a 747. They can't keep a lid on the story. Too many people coming forward saying, I saw a missile rise up out of that Navy exercise and kill that plane. 1 week later, Olympic Park bombing, boom. And the media drops TWA 800. They stop talking to anybody who's talking about missiles and strange behavior by the government and the search teams. And they're off to the Olympics. Change the story, change the focus. Beirut bombing, it's a huge embarrassment for the U.S. 1 week later, invade Grenada. This is how the U.S. government controls these stories. So they didn't get any traction with Boston. I don't think they're getting traction with all this talk about weapons of mass destruction in Syria, because you remember the weapons of mass destruction stuff about Iraq. So we could very easily see in the coming weeks a new false flag terror attack that'll be bigger and bloodier and so horrific nobody will dare doubt it. And at that point, Rangel will bring his bill to the floor, and they'll have a new draft, and this draft will take girls. They're going to take girls and put them into combat roles. And again, I'm not being sexist here, but because women do reproduce the species, I think they need to be kept out of combat. They can do other things to support the war effort. But for Rangel to be out there thinking about just throwing American girls out there at risk of being killed and crippled shows he's not thinking beyond the end of the war. He just wants to win it now for almighty Israel, and he doesn't care what happens to the American society afterwards.
And the other thing that I worry about is that apparently now there has been a green light given to women for forward combat duties.
Mm-hmm.
And not that they can't handle it, but as you said, I do not think it is the highest and best use for women in the military to put them in combat situations.
And let me clarify that point, because I got some nasty emails the other day about this very situation. If a girl wants to serve in combat, and unfortunately we know there's a bit of a problem with women on the front lines, they do get abused a lot.
Yes.
It's a huge scandal they're not talking about.
Yeah.
But if a woman really of her own volition and commitment wants to serve in combat, fine, let her.
Yes.
All right? My issue is with a government that is so unconcerned with future population rebuilding in the post-war years that they're going to put the women into combat against their will. That I do have a serious issue with. For roles that don't demand physical strength, because, sorry, the reality is, on average, men are stronger than your average woman. And there are some areas where the physical strength becomes a critical factor in winning and survival. But for non-physical roles, ship crews, pilots, things like that, yeah, women have a role to play, and a very good one as well.
Right.
But this idea that Rangel wants to draft women into combat roles, it's wrong. I don't agree with it. I'm not being sexist. I'm trying to think about rebuilding our economy in the post-war years, because those nations that protect their women will rebuild their populations faster than those nations that lose their women in combat, and that, of course, will completely reshape the post-war economic realities.
Yes, that will definitely give those other countries that do protect their women a tremendous advantage.
Absolutely.
What is the age at which drafts can start in this bill? How young to how old?
If I
roughly?
recall correctly, and I could be wrong, so if somebody has updated information, please feel free to let me know. But I think it's 18 through 45.
Wow.
For certain specialty areas, if you're a doctor, if you're an engineer, if you have skills that the military can use, they can draft you up to age 45. Thank goodness you and I are safe.
I think so.
By a huge margin.
By a very wide margin.
Actually, my current draft status is 1H in the event of war. I'm a hostage.
I'd probably be one of those as well.
Okay.
Not terribly useful.
Alrighty, so you have anything else?
I think that was it for today, and thank you.
All right, we're going to pull your microphone down, and I'm going to get on back here. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Going to get back to some health issues to round out the rest of our Friday show. We've been talking a lot about Roundup weed killer, specifically the glyphosate. This was part of the whole Roundup Ready system, where you buy your GMO seeds from Monsanto that are immune to glyphosate, and then you are able to simply spray Roundup on your garden, and everything that is not GMO gets killed. Happiness abounds. Well, we know it really didn't work out too well. Weeds are, in fact, inheriting that glyphosate gene through cross-pollination and contamination, and so now we have this whole new crop of super weeds that Roundup will not harm. And so these farmers are trapped using these very expensive GMO seeds, which produce lower yields than their natural counterparts. And more nations are saying, we don't want to buy them anyway. And these farmers are now back to dosing their fields with the very same weed killers they were using before Roundup came along. We know that glyphosate is biologically disruptive. In fact, it may be the most biologically disruptive chemical in the environment. And they're saying that glyphosate is not only harming plants, it is harming animals and humans. Remember that French study where they took rats and they fed them on organic corn, they fed them on GMO corn, and they fed them on GMO corn with the Roundup contaminants on it. And starting at 4 months, conveniently 1 month after the end of Monsanto's own safety trials, at 4 months, these rats started showing these huge tumors and reproductive problems, and basically their existence was just constant sickness and premature death. And, of course, Monsanto threw its considerable political and financial clout around and said, we refuse to accept the conclusions of that study. We, Monsanto, tested it ourselves. We found it to be perfectly safe. And, by the way, Monsanto's own corporate cafeterias do not serve GMO food, and neither does the White House, I found out. That's just for you serfs and you plebes to eat. And if you get sick, that's not a problem. You can go over to your local HMO and give them tons of money to make you well again. That's how it all works here. Now, we were talking earlier about CISPA, this bill that would allow complete surveillance of all your communications traffic and sharing of data, no warrants, no restrictions whatsoever. The House did pass it. It looks like we're hearing CISPA will fail in the Senate, may not even be brought to a vote because of rising opposition to the privacy concerns. We all have reasons to keep our communications private, not all of which relate to criminal or terroristic activity. We're sending little romantic messages to our significant other that is intended for her eyes only. And it's not a crime and it's not terrorism, but I don't want the FBI reading my little love notes to my wife. It's none of their business. And under the Fourth Amendment, it is none of their business. They're trying to get around that now. But it's looking like that will go down to defeat, except, of course, we are hearing that Obama has already implemented much of CISPA through executive orders and immunized the telecommunications companies. Now, there's another story out here. This was over at Refreshing News, talking about another court decision. We were talking about yesterday where a federal magistrate has set the legal precedent that your encryption key is protected by the Fifth Amendment. You cannot be compelled to provide a decryption key to somebody who wants to read whatever's on your smartphone, your laptop, whatever. And not only is that a vindication of the Fifth Amendment, it also tells us that the FBI and the NSA aren't really as good at breaking your encrypted traffic as they are trying to convince us they are. That's important. Now we're getting another court decision where a judge denied an FBI request to install a spy Trojan on a computer that would secretly turn on the webcam and simply keep a watch on the room. And the judge turned them down. Doesn't mean the FBI isn't going to do it. All it really means is any evidence collected on that surveillance camera would be inadmissible in court. But again, I don't want the webcam in my computer turning on without my permission and sending pictures of me and my wife back to the FBI, because sometimes my wife and I are doing what husbands and wives do. And that's not the government's business. Anyway. Got a phone call on the line. Clayton in Austin. Aloha, Clayton. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hey, I just wanted to thank you. About 2 years ago, I took your advice on getting a garden going in my backyard. And I've now got about 208 square feet of gardening space, and got so much I'm even selling vegetables to a local restaurant here. And not a whole lot, but a little bit. And it pays enough to cover all the costs of my garden and making it bigger, and pretty much half the backyard's almost, is now under production. So anyway, I just said why not, and started, and had a lot of success, a lot of errors, but I would just like I know a lot of people are buying seeds. I think that's great to have seeds, but just start with a 4x4 or 4x8 raised bed and start learning the seasons and how to grow, when you need to plant, when you need to have things out, because, there is a learning curve there. So, so people don't, think if I got my seeds, I'll just walk out one day to put them in the ground and instantly have tons of food.
It doesn't really work like that. I mean, farming is not something that people who are need instant gratification should be getting into, because it does take a long time. And even if you don't have a lot of ground to where you could have a completely self-sufficient garden, it's a good idea to be growing, it's just a few tomatoes and a few herbs, because first of all, they're not GMO, and second, it's fresh. It's not something that was picked 5 time zones away while it was green and then chemically induced to ripen while it sits in the truck or the shipping container coming to you. And again, once you taste right off the vine freshness, you understand just how poor quality the supermarket's produce is going to be if you live in an area that's too far away from the areas of production. And as a matter of fact, just the other day, I mean, we have a little space here in our place, and I put in a couple of planter boxes where I planted what I call my space tomatoes. And what this is many, many years ago, NASA flew several loads of tomato and basil and other seeds on the space shuttle to make up these little science classroom kits where you had seeds that had been in space, seeds that had been just on Earth Control Group, seeds that had spent a couple of months undersea at one of these undersea labs. And the idea is you'd plant them all and see if there were any differences, and it turns out there wasn't. And so the popularity of these little seed packets went away. But you can still find them. And I bought a couple that I was going to help our neighbors' kids with a science fair project, but then the kids had to move away because of there was an arrest for drugs. So I finally decided, rather than let the seeds go to waste, I've put them out there, and I've got my little space tomatoes growing. And we're just, there's not enough to live on, obviously, but we'll get one and cut it up for the occasional salad. But again, you're right. If you have the room to start a vegetable garden, the time to start it is right now. We're in the spring planting season, and learn the skills, because there are a lot of skills about getting them growing, getting the seedlings transplanted, fertilization, keeping the weeds out without chemicals. And of course, Monsanto doesn't want you learning how to do that. The food corporations don't want you to learn about gardening. In fact, there's this very bizarre story. This came out of the Healthy Home Economist, where this teacher, Mr. Bartlett, must be a distant relative, showed gardening tools to his class to teach these kids, and he didn't actually give the kids the gardening tools. He just showed them. These are what these are and what they do. And he got suspended. He got suspended for possessing, carrying, storing, or using a weapon. Use a gardening trowel, go to jail. What is wrong with our schools? We had that guy who called in a little earlier, says his 6-year-old is coming in parroting this Israeli propaganda. We're fighting against Muslim terrorists. We're fighting against... Aren't schools supposed to be about learning skills and knowledge that help you survive in a modern technological society? Whatever happened to arithmetic, algebra, geometry, science, physics, chemistry? Are those completely devoid from our schools? I've noticed when I go around the local toy store, all the science and engineering toys I knew as a kid, they're just not there anymore. It's always the latest branded character from the latest Hollywood movie. And the last time I saw a chemistry set, it didn't even have chemicals in it. You got these little slips of paper that were impregnated with microscopic amounts of chemical, and you'd wet them and stick them together, and it would change color, and that was your chemistry education. When I was a kid, I used to go down to this toy store near where I lived, and they just had racks of chemical equipment, beakers, test tubes, stuff, and racks of jars full of chemicals, and you could buy whatever you needed to just conduct your own experiments. You weren't following somebody's program of mix this with this, get this color, now you're a chemist. We're being dumbed down and propagandized. Our schools aren't about education any longer. They're about indoctrination. And for them to suspend this teacher for showing gardening tools to his class, don't they want these kids to be able to go out and plant and care for their own gardens? Apparently not. That will cut into Monsanto's profitability. Clayton, we're almost at the end of this segment. You got anything else to add?
No, I just wanted to thank you for getting me started, and it's a wonderful way to build community too, because I've been able to share the vegetables and snap peas and things that I'm growing with my neighbors, and I got another neighbor now who started a small little raised bed, and it's starting to have this little domino effect down the street.
Oh, that's great.
And it can be a really cool thing.
All right, Clayton, I got to cut you off. We're coming to commercial break. Yeah. Would you do me a favor and send me a photograph of your garden? I would love to see that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right, fantabulous. Clayton, thank you very much for the phone call. Good luck with your gardening, and we're going to take a break for our last commercial break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're sort of winding our program down for Friday, heading into the weekend. Got a lot of stuff to do and take care of. We're heading out later today to to help feed Oahu's hungry, food insecure, whatever the euphemism is on that situation. A couple more stories about farming. Apparently up in Canada, their food inspection agency is on a campaign to eradicate any species of sheep that is not commercially useful to the large corporations, and there's a big stink regarding these rare Shropshire sheep at the Whole Earth Farm Studio. And they're out there saying, you have to get rid of these kinds of sheep. They're a threat to the commercially viable and profitable sheep. Apparently, they were killing sheep that were perfectly healthy. We're doing it just in case. It's a preemptive sheepicide. And again, it's all about erasing people's ability to fend for themselves, grow the food they want to grow the sheep they want to grow, and keep our dependence on the corporations. It's enforced dependency, and enforced dependency is slavery here. Another interesting story, apparently this is up in Vermont, where this farmer was apparently arrested for marijuana possession. And he took his farm tractor and he ran over 8 vehicles in the parking lot of the Vermont police station. He flattened 7 marked police cruisers and 1 unmarked police car at the Orleans County Sheriff's Department in Derby, Vermont. I'm having a really hard time waving my finger at him. I imagine he's in a lot more trouble than just for possession of marijuana, but those New Englanders, they're fiercely independent here. Oh, let's see. We already talked about this before. Nevada is busing their mentally ill patients to other cities around the country to get rid of them. Detroit area police are dumping the homeless outside. We're too busy propping up the banks. We can't take care of you, American people. We're too busy keeping Wall Street healthy. Let's see. Apparently there has been a complete, utter failure of the latest HIV treatment. Remember, nobody's looking for a cure. They're looking for treatments. And apparently, after a 4-year trial, they found out this latest HIV vaccine just doesn't work at all. Up in Canada, they just came out with a documentary called Drug Reactions. They're getting it about SSRIs. There's this whole documentary where they're out there saying there is a huge problem with these prescription antidepressants causing people to go postal, to start killing others and themselves and commit strange acts of bizarre behavior. The Canadians get it. Corporate media in the U.S. won't touch it. Congress held hearings. They won't do anything. All hail the mighty Monsanto dollar. Bow down before Monsanto's dollars. We can never question the huge and mighty Monsanto. Don't forget, if you want to avoid GMO, buy kosher. Kosher certification does not allow GMO. Don't need no GMO labeling law now. We'll be back Monday. Until then, have a good weekend. Please make a point of sharing what you know with all your friends, family, and neighbors. Please spread the word about Republic Broadcasting. Our audience is growing, but we need to reach the people who haven't yet figured out what's going on. We need to evangelize the truth. Thank you for your help. Aloha, America.